Hi, friends. Tonight, we begin a journey into a world long buried, a tale whispered through stone and ash, a memory sealed beneath centuries of silence. This is the story of Pompeii, its life, its heartbeat, and its final breath beneath a sky that once turned to fire. In this first chapter, we gently awaken the slumbering city as it stood before calamity, its sun-drenched streets, its gentle rhythms, and the mountain that watched silently, unknowingly. Let us begin where peace still lingered. In the waning days of summer, in the year we now call 79 AD, the city of Pompeii stirred like any other Roman town. The sun rose warm over the Bay of Naples, casting golden fingers upon tiled rooftops and olive groves. The air was sweet with fig and grape, and a breeze from the Tyrrhenian Sea crept softly over the quiet hills. Pompeii was no grand metropolis like Rome, but it lived and thrived in its own radiant simplicity. Nestled near the base of Mount Vesuvius, it was a place of merchants and mosaics, of laughter in bathhouses and prayers whispered in household shrines. Life flowed through its cobbled arteries, not in torrents, but in steady pulses of everyday joy. Children scampered barefoot across sun-warmed stone, chasing shadows and stray dogs. Bakers rose before dawn, their hands kneading dough into hearty loaves while the city slumbered. In the forum, voices rose in barter, echoing off white colonnades like soft music. There was no reason to suspect that anything lay ahead but more. Days like this one, simple, sunlit, and safe. Vesuvius, the mountain that would come to define Pompeii's fate, stood silent. To the people, it was not a volcano. No such word existed in their language, for its last eruption had come long before. Memory or record, to them, Vesuvius was a source of fertile land, a green giant whose flanks fed vineyards and whose presence was as steady as the stars, and in that certainty, life unfolded. Marcus Vitruvius, a cloth merchant, paced his dye shop with calm precision. His fingers bore the stains of Tyrian purple, a colour so dear that emperors wrapped themselves in it. He hummed an old Etruscan tune as he inspected bolts of fabric, unaware that the sky, even now, was measuring the hours left. Nearby, Livia, a young woman with oil-dark hair, lit a lamp in her family's atrium. The flame flickered over frescoes of Venus and Mars, bathing the painted gods in an amber glow. She whispered to them, a prayer for love perhaps, or safe travels for her brother, a soldier posted in Germania. Such were the thoughts that wandered through Pompeii. Modest, human, and endearingly unimportant in the grand tapestry of Roman history. Yet history would carve Pompeii's name in marble, not for her wealth or conquests, but for her stillness, for how perfectly she would be captured in her last, fleeting breath. On this quiet day, the town was preparing for a festival. Grapes had begun to sweeten on the vine, and Bacchus, the god of wine and revelry, would soon be honoured with songs, garlands, and celebration. There was much to do, garlands to twist from laurel and myrtle, amphorae to fill, and poetry to rehearse. But beneath the ground, something ancient stirred. At first it was only a whisper, a tremor, so soft it could be mistaken for a passing cart. A shudder beneath the soles of sandals, quickly forgotten. You see, in the weeks leading up to the final eruption, the earth had spoken more than once. A crack in the temple of Jupiter, a few walls fallen in the night. But these were not strangers to the Pompeians. They had lived with the moods of the earth before. The gods, they believed, sent signs. But what could they mean? And who among them had the power to truly listen? Still, in this moment, there was peace. A dog barked lazily from the steps of the Temple of Apollo. The baker's boy tossed breadcrumbs to sparrows beneath the fig trees. The aqueduct hissed softly, feeding cool water into marble basins. Even the mountain, vast and brooding, looked almost gentle beneath a veil of drifting cloud. Time passed without urgency. We must remember, dear listener, that tragedy often walks in silence before it speaks in thunder. Pompeii was not caught unaware. In the flash of one violent instant, it was lulled, comforted, made drowsy by the hum of its own heartbeat. As night began to fall over the city, lamps were lit one by one like stars upon the earth. The streets, now emptied of the day's bustle, filled with the softer sounds of homecoming, the creak of wooden doors, laughter from courtyards, the clink of amphorae filled with evening wine. Above them all, Vesuvius sat cloaked in the coming darkness. No smoke rose from its crown, no fire peeked from its depths, only silence, a patient silence, ancient and waiting. And in the dreamless slumber of that night, the people of Pompeii did not know that they were stepping into history, not as names carved in triumph, but as memories locked in ash. Let us rest with them now, here in the hush before the storm. Tomorrow the earth shall speak more clearly. The dawn that followed was painted in delicate shades of apricot and rose. Over the sloping roofs of Pompeii, the sunlight crept like a whispered promise. In the narrow streets still wet from dew, shadows clung to the base of marble columns and the curved edges of amphorae stacked outside shops. For a while, it seemed as though the world had not changed, and yet something subtle had shifted. The pigeons that usually fluttered and cooed around the temple of Isis were absent this morning. The fountain in the forum gurgled with a strange irregular rhythm, like the breathing of someone disturbed in their sleep. And beneath the souls of Pompeii's citizens, the earth murmured once more, a gentle tremble, a hesitant pulse from the depths. It began early, just as the city stirred to life. A distant rumble that some mistook for thunder, though no clouds, darkened the sky. Others claimed they heard a long, low moan, like the voice of a buried god turning uneasily in his subterranean bed. Lucius, a potter whose kiln stood at the edge of the city, paused in his work. The freshly thrown bowls on his wheel quivered. Tiny fractures spidered through one of them as he looked around, wide-eyed and uncertain. He was not alone. Along the Via dell'Abbondanza, shopkeepers emerged from their doorways, squinting at the dust that rose unbidden from the stones. At first, there was no panic. The people of Pompeii had known tremors before. In fact, just 17 years earlier, a great earthquake had shaken the region, collapsing temples and tearing open walls. The city had rebuilt. The gods had been appeased. Life had moved on. So, as the morning unfolded, many brushed aside their unease. In the villa of the wealthy merchant Gaius Faustus, slaves carried amphorae of wine into the triclinium, preparing for a midday feast. His wife, Domitia, stood at the balcony brushing olive oil through her long hair, gazing toward the sea. The sky was clear and the waters shimmered. Yet she too felt it, a tightness in her chest, an unspoken warning that tugged at her ribs. Augurs, priests skilled in reading omens, were called upon. Some examined the flight of birds, though few were to be found in the sky. Others studied the livers of sacrificed animals, but their messages were vague and troubling. The signs were not good, but they were not yet dire, not yet. Still, in the hearts of the people, something ancient stirred, a whisper of fear wrapped in denial. Down in the city's theatre district, actors rehearsed a comedy for the upcoming festival. Their voices rang out with laughter and exaggerated woe, yet a certain stiffness crept into their performances. Was it the tremors, or the way the air felt heavier, as if holding its breath? Meanwhile, Livia, the young woman who had lit the lamp the night before, found herself unable to focus on her embroidery. The thread slipped from her fingers more than once. She sat in the atrium, her eyes fixed on the garden, where the laurel tree's leaves shivered without wind. Her father, a former centurion turned wine trader, noticed the tremble in her hands and gently placed a cloak around her shoulders, though the morning was warm. "Just the mountain stretching its back," he said with a smile. But even as he spoke, his gaze drifted toward Vesuvius. And still, the mountain remained cloaked in deceptive calm. No smoke, no roar, just silence. By midday, the unease had become harder to ignore. Wells seemed shallower than they had been. The dogs, usually lazy and sun-drunk, paced and whimpered. One was seen barking at the entrance of a shrine, refusing to be soothed. Horses stomped in their stalls, and a herd of goats refused to climb the slope they usually wandered. At the bathhouse, steam hissed too strongly from the pipes. One pool, fed by subterranean heat, boiled briefly and inexplicably. The bathers hurried out, muttering of demons and angry nymphs. The priests of Vulcan, the god of fire and the forge, offered sacrifices. Incense burned thick and acrid in the air. Still, there was no answer, no voice in the smoke, only the growing knowledge that something unseen was shifting beneath them. In the forum, word spread of the tremors. The local magistrates convened, not out of fear, but from a desire to appear in control. Plans were made to inspect the aqueducts and reinforce certain buildings. There was talk of evacuating the elderly from the villas near the mountain's slope, but it remained only that, talk. For though the earth groaned, no fire had yet come. As evening approached, the skies painted themselves in more dramatic hues than usual. Lavender, gold, and a bruised shade of purple near the horizon. The light touched every rooftop, every statue, every wall of frescoed myth. In the Villa of Mysteries, where beautiful murals of Dionysian rites lined the walls, a visitor paused, struck by the figures in the paintings. The eyes of the gods and dancers seemed to follow her, as if watching not from canvas, but from the veil between worlds. Night fell with a soft hush, but it brought little rest. Some lay awake, listening. The tremors were softer now, but still, there, like breathing, like the heartbeat of something vast. Others dreamed of falling rocks and choking ash. One man claimed to see a wave of fire sweeping through the streets in his sleep, but he awoke and laughed it away over a cup of mulled wine. Yet beneath the city, the mountain's blood was stirring. The chamber beneath Vesuvius, that slumbering chamber of magma and pressure, was swelling. Cracks spidered deeper into the earth's belly. Gases, ancient and hungry, pushed toward the surface. Above, the stars wheeled on in their silence, and the people of Pompeii, unsuspecting, resilient, and so achingly human, slipped into uneasy dreams. Tomorrow, the signs would grow bolder. But tonight, we rest once more in the hush before the fire. Night had fallen, though in truth the darkness had begun long before the sun officially yielded to the horizon. Pompeii, once golden and adorned in the blush of Mediterranean light, now lay swaddled in greyness, a silence that smothered, not soothed. The eruption had grown bolder. As the sun was swallowed whole behind the dense curtain of ash, visibility fell to a few feet. Lamps flickered dimly, their glow swallowed by the soot-laden air. Sparks from collapsing roofs occasionally lit alleyways with eerie flashes, revealing the haunted silhouettes of those still wandering, still searching for safety or sense. By now, the city was blanketed in nearly 6 feet of pumice and ash. Each step became a labour. People staggered, carrying their belongings above their heads to prevent tripping. Some abandoned their possessions, shedding the weight of status and comfort in exchange for speed and air. The ashen rain fell endlessly. It came in small, sharp stones, pumice so light it could float, yet so persistent it tore at skin and crushed the weak. It hissed as it struck heated tiles and smouldering embers. It piled on rooftops, in courtyards, in the folds of clothing and the hollows of the human body. Breathing became a struggle. The air was thick with fine powder. Inhaling it was like drawing dust into the lungs. Some tried to cover their faces with cloth, with leather, with anything at all. Others fell where they stood, choking silently, and yet people still fled. Along the Via dei Sepolcri, the road of the tombs leading away from Pompeii's northern gate, a stream of survivors stumbled past the necropolis. They moved with agonizing slowness. Women carried infants wrapped in damp tunics. Old men leaned on the arms of slaves and younger kin. Children cried without words, their small mouths filled with the dry taste of sulfur. In this exodus was a woman named Cassia, once a jewelry seller, who now clutched nothing but a wooden figurine of Fortuna. Her stall had collapsed hours earlier, buried beneath stone and dust, but she had dug with her bare hands to retrieve the idol. As she trudged past the tombs, each carved with names of those long dead, she whispered prayers not for riches, but for breath and a second dawn. Behind her, the city groaned. Roofs caved under the growing weight. Walls, once covered in delicate frescoes of gods and lovers, split open, spilling plaster and pigment into the suffocating air. Statues fell from their pedestals, arms snapping, faces shattering. The gods were crumbling. In the darkness, dogs howled. Those not already fled or buried by the falling stone roamed the city in frenzied panic. Their yelps cut through the hush like broken hymns. One dog, later found preserved in twisted agony, had been tied to a post. Its master had fled, or perhaps fallen, and the animal, loyal beyond reason, had remained. Within the city walls, a few souls still clung to hope. In the house of the tragic poet, named not for any known story, but for the intensity of its mosaics, a group of neighbors had gathered. They sat together in the atrium, surrounded by painted scenes of Iliad and Odyssey, as if waiting for heroes to emerge from the walls and rescue them. They passed around oil-soaked cloths, pressed to their mouths. They told stories to the children, tales of Hercules and his labors, of gods who battled chaos and always prevailed. One woman, Flavia, sang softly, her voice dry and hoarse, yet sweet as she remembered a lullaby her mother once sang. Still, the mountain thundered. The great cloud above had spread for miles, casting its pall not just over Pompeii, but to Herculaneum, Stabiae, and beyond. It towered more than 20 kilometers into the sky, a monstrous tree of smoke with a trunk of fury and branches of lightning. And far from Pompeii, Pliny the Elder, scholar, admiral, and lover of knowledge, watched from Misenum. His curiosity overcame fear. With ships at his disposal, he launched a rescue mission across the bay, his eyes fixed on the unnatural cloud. He described it in his writings as like a pine tree, for it rose high with a narrow stem and then spread out in branches. He would soon sail toward that deadly plume, unaware it would be his final voyage. But for those still trapped within Pompeii, survival was a quiet war. Each hour, the sky grew heavier, each breath harder. The streets, once echoing with the life of a bustling Roman town, had become tunnels of despair. Some people sought shelter in cellars, unaware that they were sealing their fate. Others climbed to the rooftops, hoping to rise above the falling death. But there was no escape up or down, only forward, if forward still existed. In the house of Menander, a noble residence with gardens and columns, the family had gathered what they could carry: jewels, scrolls, household gods. They moved together, servants and masters side by side. Their path took them through the theatre quarter, where abandoned masks still lay on the stage. No laughter would come from them again. The night dragged on, hour by hour, blanketing Pompeii, not only in ash, but in silence. The voices grew fewer, the footsteps fainter. The ashen rain had become a slow burial, and yet, within this smothering stillness, humanity flickered. A boy shared the last of his dried figs with a stranger. A girl paused to help an elderly man stand from the ground, his limbs too stiff to rise alone. A pair of lovers, uncertain of whether they would live another hour, kissed beneath a collapsed portico, as though time itself could be stilled by touch. These were Pompeii's final witnesses, not emperors or generals, but bakers, dancers, scribes, and mothers. Not grand in history's eyes, yet immortalized forever in the still embrace of ash. And above them all, Vesuvius continued its wrath, but the worst had not yet come. Night had fallen, though in truth the darkness had begun long before the sun officially yielded to the horizon. Pompeii, once golden and adorned in the blush of Mediterranean light, now lay swaddled in greyness, a silence that smothered, not soothed. The eruption had grown bolder. As the sun was swallowed whole behind the dense curtain of ash, visibility fell to a few feet. Lamps flickered dimly, their glow swallowed by the soot-laden air. Sparks from collapsing roofs occasionally lit alleyways with eerie flashes, revealing the haunted silhouettes of those still wandering, still searching for safety or sense. By now, the city was blanketed in nearly 6 feet of pumice and ash. Each step became a labor. People staggered, carrying their belongings above their heads to prevent tripping. Some abandoned their possessions, shedding the weight of status and comfort in exchange for speed and air. The ashen rain fell endlessly. It came in small, sharp stones, pumice so light it could float, yet so persistent it tore at skin and crushed the weak. It hissed as it struck heated tiles and smouldering embers. It piled on rooftops, in courtyards, in the folds of clothing and the hollows of the human body. Breathing became a struggle. The air was thick with fine powder. Inhaling it was like drawing dust into the lungs. Some tried to cover their faces with cloth, with leather, with anything at all. Others fell where they stood, choking silently, and yet people still fled. Along the Via dei Sepolcri, the road of the tombs leading away from Pompeii's northern gate, a stream of survivors stumbled past the necropolis. They moved with agonizing slowness. Women carried infants wrapped in damp tunics. Old men leaned on the arms of slaves and younger kin. Children cried without words, their small mouths filled with the dry taste of sulfur. In this exodus was a woman named Cassia, once a jewelry seller, who now clutched nothing but a wooden figurine of Fortuna. Her stall had collapsed hours earlier, buried beneath stone and dust, but she had dug with her bare hands to retrieve the idol. As she trudged past the tombs, each carved with names of those long dead, she whispered prayers not for riches, but for breath and a second dawn. Behind her, the city groaned. Roofs caved under the growing weight. Walls, once covered in delicate frescoes of gods and lovers, split open, spilling plaster and pigment into the suffocating air. Statues fell from their pedestals, arms snapping, faces shattering. The gods were crumbling. In the darkness, dogs howled. Those not already fled or buried by the falling stone roamed the city in frenzied panic. Their yelps cut through the hush like broken hymns. One dog, later found preserved in twisted agony, had been tied to a post. Its master had fled, or perhaps fallen, and the animal, loyal beyond reason, had remained. Within the city walls, a few souls still clung to hope. In the house of the tragic poet, named not for any known story, but for the intensity of its mosaics, a group of neighbors had gathered. They sat together in the atrium, surrounded by painted scenes of Iliad and Odyssey, as if waiting for heroes to emerge from the walls and rescue them. They passed around oil-soaked cloths, pressed to their mouths. They told stories to the children, tales of Hercules and his labors, of gods who battled chaos and always prevailed. One woman, Flavia, sang softly, her voice dry and hoarse, yet sweet as she remembered a lullaby her mother once sang. Still, the mountain thundered. The great cloud above had spread for miles, casting its pall not just over Pompeii, but to Herculaneum, Stabiae, and beyond. It towered more than 20 kilometers into the sky, a monstrous tree of smoke with a trunk of fury and branches of lightning. And far from Pompeii, Pliny the Elder, scholar, admiral, and lover of knowledge, watched from Misenum. His curiosity overcame fear. With ships at his disposal, he launched a rescue mission across the bay, his eyes fixed on the unnatural cloud. He described it in his writings as like a pine tree, for it rose high with a narrow stem and then spread out in branches. He would soon sail toward that deadly plume, unaware it would be his final voyage. But for those still trapped within Pompeii, survival was a quiet war. Each hour, The sky grew heavier, each breath harder. The streets, once echoing with the life of a bustling Roman town, had become tunnels of despair. Some people sought shelter in cellars, unaware that they were sealing their fate. Others climbed to the rooftops, hoping to rise above the falling death. But there was no escape up or down, only forward, if forward still existed. In the house of Menander, a noble residence with gardens and columns, the family had gathered what they could carry: jewels, scrolls, household gods. They moved together, servants and masters side by side. Their path took them through the theatre quarter, where abandoned masks still lay on the stage. No laughter would come from them again. The night dragged on, hour by hour, blanketing Pompeii, not only in ash, but in silence. The voices grew fewer, the footsteps fainter. The ashen rain had become a slow burial, and yet, within this smothering stillness, humanity flickered. A boy shared the last of his dried figs with a stranger. A girl paused to help an elderly man stand from the ground, his limbs too stiff to rise alone. A pair of lovers, uncertain of whether they would live another hour, kissed beneath a collapsed portico, as though time itself could be stilled by touch. These were Pompeii's final witnesses, not emperors or generals, but bakers, dancers, scribes, and mothers. Not grand in history's eyes, yet immortalized forever in the still embrace of ash. And above them all, Vesuvius continued its wrath, but the worst had not yet come. By the early hours of the next morning, August 25th, the city of Pompeii was no longer merely a place caught in disaster. It had become a graveyard of echoes, a theatre of silence. But the mountain had not yet delivered its cruelest act. For nearly 18 hours, the eruption had raged. Pumice and ash had fallen without mercy. Roofs had collapsed, streets had vanished, and the sea, once a shining escape, had become choked with floating stone and sulphurous haze. Many believed it was over. Those who still breathed, huddled in homes, hiding in baths, sheltering beneath stone arches, began to hope the storm had passed. The sky, while still dark, had grown quieter. The great column above Vesuvius began to lean to one side, the power behind it waning. And then, the world ended. What came next was not the delicate fall of ash, nor the light thudding of pumice. It was something else entirely, something ancient and beyond mercy. A pyroclastic surge. It began with a sudden roar, a monstrous sound like every god of Olympus crying out in fury. From the summit of Vesuvius burst a cloud not of ash, but of fire, gas, and molten rock. It raced down the slopes at hundreds of kilometers per hour, too fast to flee, too hot to survive. No warning, no escape. Only the sudden arrival of heat hotter than any forge. Over 400 degrees Celsius, enough to vaporize clothing, to stop a heart before the lungs could scream. The city was swallowed in an instant. Those caught in the open died where they stood. Some mid-step, others clutching loved ones. Their final gestures immortalized not by art or tale, but by the ash that embraced them. The surge moved through Pompeii like a demon wind. It roared through the streets, flattening whatever still stood. Doorways that had held strong against the falling debris were shattered open. Fountains cracked, their waters boiling before vanishing. Bronze and iron, if exposed, grew soft and glowed red. In one moment, life simply ceased. Bodies already sheltering from ash were caught in mid-motion, hands raised to mouths, arms curled over children. Death came not in agony, but in silence, instantaneous and without struggle. The house of the Veti, once a testament to opulence and sensual art, collapsed in on itself. Its famous frescoes, those bold and playful images of cupids and bacchantes, vanished beneath the tide of gas and ash. In a narrow street, two brothers, barely more than boys, were found centuries later locked in an embrace, their fingers still intertwined. Were they running? Or had they simply chosen to meet the fire together? In a bakery, a woman crouched near an oven, a loaf still half-baked inside. Perhaps she believed the thick walls of the kitchen might protect her. But the heat laughed at, stone and skin alike. And in the temple of Venus, the goddess of love who had watched over Pompeii for generations, her marble image shattered beneath the force. Her temple, once adorned with roses and prayers, became a tomb. The surge did not stop. It continued beyond the city walls, reaching toward the countryside, devouring vineyards and farms. Sheep and oxen fell where they grazed. Trees were blackened into skeletal remains. Even the air above the ground shimmered with unnatural heat. And then came another. A second surge, just as swift, just as deadly. This one tore through what little remained. Buildings already damaged collapsed entirely. Those who had survived the first wave, somehow shielded by cellar or corridor, were now entombed. Their shelter became sarcophagi. Within an hour, the once vibrant Pompeii was no more. It was not burned to the ground. It was sealed, preserved, frozen in its death. The ash cooled quickly, forming a crust over the ruin. Within that crust, the bodies of those who had perished remained, hollow spaces in time. Above, the sky was quiet once more. Vesuvius exhaled a final breath, a thin wisp of steam rising from its crater. The god had spoken. The judgment was done. All that remained was silence, but within that silence something profound lingered. Because Pompeii did not vanish entirely, it was hidden, protected, in a cruel and sacred way, by the very force that destroyed it. The city, its art, its people, their postures, their lives, all of it was captured in a moment so complete, so absolute, that the centuries could not erase it. There was a man known only as the Twisted One, found later near the city's gate. His spine curved, his body thrown backwards in a final moment of horror or prayer. Who he was, what he believed, whom he loved, lost, but his shape told a story words never could. And the dog, the one chained near the mosaic, Cave Canem, the warning to beware of the dog, was found in contorted agony, caught in death as he had been in loyalty. In total, the surges killed nearly all who remained. Herculaneum too, lying closer to the volcano, suffered an even more intense fate. But it was Pompeii that, in death, whispered the most enduring tale. Because here, history was not written in scrolls or marble, but in ash, in the emptiness where bodies once lay, in the shadows of cups left mid-drink, loaves left mid-bake, hearts left mid-beat. When the firestorm fell, it did not destroy life. It preserved it at its most fragile and most human. So as we rest now, imagine the hush that followed, a city encased in silence beneath a sky gone pale with soot. Nothing moved, nothing breathed, and yet everything remained, waiting. The dawn of August 25th broke over a different world. The mountain no longer thundered. The sea had returned to stillness. The ash had settled. And Pompeii, once a city of fountains and laughter, of painted gods and market songs, was now nothing but a humped silhouette beneath a grey, silent shroud. No birds sang, no smoke curled from chimneys, no footsteps echoed in the narrow streets. The only movement came from the wind, which whispered across the ash like fingers across parchment, too gentle to disturb, too late to save. To the rest of the Roman Empire, Pompeii was gone. At first, some assumed it had merely suffered another earthquake. The news travelled slowly, and many believed survivors would return with stories, perhaps to rebuild once more. But no one came. The towns around the Bay of Naples were stunned into silence. In Herculaneum, buried even more completely than Pompeii, little hope remained. Stabiae was scorched, and even Misenum, across the water, had known fear. The harbour stank of sulphur. Boats that sailed close returned with sails darkened by ash. Soon nature reclaimed what it could. Wild olives sprouted in the dust. Birds returned to perch upon the rocky rim of Vesuvius, as though the mountain had never spoken in fire. Rain smoothed the hard ash. New roots wormed their way through cracks in collapsed walls. The outlines of villas faded beneath wild grass and vines, and Pompeii slept. Beneath layers of ash, time stood still. In the house of the surgeon, medical tools lay neatly arranged, as though waiting for a patient who had stepped out for air. In the Villa of Mysteries, frescoes of Dionysian rites, wreathed dancers and scarlet-cloaked priestesses, remained vivid behind walls no longer seen. In bakeries, loaves were petrified mid-rise in stone ovens, each still bearing the baker's personal stamp. In the forum, beneath a roofless expanse, marble columns stood like teeth in a silent mouth. Years passed, then decades, then centuries. The Roman Empire fell. Barbarians swept across the continent. New languages replaced Latin. Christianity replaced Jupiter and Juno. Roads crumbled, maps changed. But beneath the soil, Pompeii held her breath. By the 8th century, her name had all but faded from memory. Travelers and peasants passed by, never suspecting what lay below. Shepherds grazed sheep on the ground above palaces. Ploughs scraped across rooftops hidden just beneath the surface. And so the city endured, not in story, not in song, but in stillness. It would remain so for over 1,500 years. Then, one day, curiosity scratched at the earth. It began without drama. In the 16th century, workers digging a new aqueduct struck marble where none should be. They found walls with paint still gleaming, mosaics, bones, but they did not understand. They thought they had stumbled on a villa or a temple lost to time. It was not until the 18th century that the truth began to surface. In 1748, under the patronage of King Charles III of Naples, systematic excavations began. Men with shovels and brushes, with picks and lanterns, clawed at the soil. What they uncovered would stun the world. They found a city, complete and intact, as if stopped mid-breath. Houses stood where they had fallen. Tools lay on benches. Jewelry remained on the skeletons of women who had fled too late. Wine jars were sealed. Street signs still hung from walls. Graffiti, witty, crude, poetic, adorned doorways, as fresh as ink. Marcus loves Julia, one read. Another, beware of the innkeeper. He waters his wine. The human voice, silenced for centuries, had returned. But it was the bodies that changed everything. As excavators dug, they encountered strange voids in the ash, spaces where bones lay, surrounded by empty hollows. A Neapolitan engineer named Giuseppe Fiorelli had a revolutionary idea. In 1863, he poured liquid plaster into the voids, letting it harden before removing the surrounding ash. What emerged were the people of Pompeii as they had died. Some crouched in corners, some lay as if asleep. A mother curled around her child. A man shielded his face. Their expressions were frozen, their final gestures preserved in heartbreak and dignity. The plaster did not just show their forms, it revealed their stories. And so Pompeii lived again. The world watched in awe. Scholars, artists, and romantics flocked to the ruins. Writers composed poems about the ash-kissed lovers. Historians walked the streets with notebooks and reverence. Tourists trailed guides who whispered of Saturnalia feasts and stolen kisses beneath laurel trees. Pompeii became a mirror. It showed us Rome not in its grandeur, but in its humanity, in bread ovens and bathhouses, in taverns and graffiti, in beds and garden shrines. It showed that Romans were not just emperors and senators, but people like us, flawed, tender, afraid, and full of life. And through it all, the mountain loomed. Even now, Vesuvius stands quiet, but not dead. The people who live nearby know its name. They walk its slopes and toast wine from its fertile soil, But in the quiet moments, they remember. Because beneath their feet lies a city once lost, once buried, and never truly forgotten. Pompeii did not fall in fire. It rose in silence, and in silence it waits still. Long after the firestorm fell silent and the final breath of ash cooled on the skin of the earth, Pompeii continued to speak, not in voice, nor in legend passed from mouth to mouth, but through colour and stone, through frescoes etched with myth and desire, and through walls that still held the fingerprints of the men who built them. To walk the streets of Pompeii today is to step not into ruins, but into a memory suspended. Here, time is not linear. It folds and breathes, winding between the present and a single catastrophic day in 79 AD. Each cracked tile and faded mural tells a story of life not as imagined, but as it truly was. Complex, indulgent, raw, and deeply human. The frescoes are the first to catch the eye. In the Villa of the Mysteries, just beyond the city's edge, crimson walls hold a processional painting more vivid than time should allow. Life-sized figures dance, kneel, and whirl. Priestesses in flowing robes, initiates with lowered eyes, and gods both masked and unveiled. The room seems to pulse with ancient rhythm, as if the rites never ended, only paused. No one knows exactly what the frescoes depict. Some say they represent an initiation into the cult of Dionysus, the god of ecstasy, of wine, and transformation. Others see it as a celebration of marriage, or a visual hymn to the mysteries of femininity. Whatever its truth, the scene is startling in its intimacy. The figures do not pose, they move. A girl is flogged in ritual ecstasy. A matron gazes out, as if aware of the viewer. Cupids flit in the background. There is laughter, fear, seduction, and surrender, all in one breathless mural. And above it all, the mountain that destroyed this house still looms, its silence echoed in their painted eyes. In other homes, the walls are no less poetic. The house of the golden cupids, with its delicate winged figures playing across deep black backgrounds, holds a different kind of beauty, gentler, more domestic. These were not halls of cult and ceremony, but the private space of a wealthy family where love and leisure mingled with routine. Even the modest homes held art. Frescoes of fruit-laden platters, of peacocks and fountains, of gods reclining with, mortals and musicians plucking lyres. In Pompeii, beauty was not reserved for temples and palaces. It adorned kitchens and courtyards, bedrooms and stairwells. It was meant to be lived with. And then there is the graffiti. Scrawled on walls, scratched into stucco, inked beside fountains, or bathhouse doors. It is the voice of the ordinary citizen, speaking through centuries. I was here. I drank wine. I made love. I hope your hangover is as bad as your singing. Secundus loves Primer. Beware. The woman here is a man-eater. These inscriptions do not glamorize. They do not mythologize. They breathe. They joke. They flirt. They complain. They bring Pompeii to life in a way no sculpture or scroll ever could. On the wall of a tavern, Fortunata, come back to me, I have money now. On the door of a house, if you are looking for good bread, come inside. If you are looking for trouble, keep walking. It is tempting to laugh, and many do, but within these scribbles is something profound, the persistence of voice, the refusal to be forgotten. In writing their words into plaster, the people of Pompeii ensured they would be heard long after breath had left their lungs. The stones, too, have stories. The basalt slabs of the Via dell'Abbondanza, worn, smooth by chariot wheels, still bear their ruts. They tell us how often trade moved through the heart of the city. The stepping stones, placed across the street when rain turned roads into rivers, are spaced exactly to allow cartwheels through. Practical elegance. In the amphitheatre, the oldest surviving Roman arena, the ghost of spectacle lingers. It once held 20,000 spectators. Gladiators clashed here. Musicians played. Traders sold snacks and souvenirs. Blood was spilled, but so too was laughter. And then there is the House of the Faun. Grand, sprawling, it was home to one of the most impressive mosaics of the ancient world. Alexander the Great in battle, captured in thousands of tiny coloured stones. The mosaic, now preserved in Naples, once lay on the floor of the atrium, where guests would gaze upon it as they stepped into a world of art, war, and pride. Even the water speaks. Fountains, decorated with masks and nymphs, still stand in squares and courtyards. Lead pipes, cleverly hidden in walls, carried fresh water into homes. Pompeii had public baths, private latrines, and an aqueduct system that rivaled that of cities far larger. Hygiene, ritual, and pleasure intertwined. And beneath all this, the bones. Over 1,000 casts have been made of the dead, their bodies revealed by voids in the ash. They are not merely exhibits, they are witnesses. A woman with rings still on her fingers, a man curled beside a horse, a family in an underground room, arms wrapped around each other. They are not unnamed. We do not know their titles, but we know their final gestures. And in that, they live. Through fresco and stone, graffiti and cast, Pompeii speaks not of death, but of the fragility and vibrancy of life. The city was not great because it was vast. It was not sacred because of gods or generals. It was sacred because it was human, filled with ordinary people who lived deeply, imperfectly, and with beauty in their breath. And in that quiet echo, drifting through painted halls and empty rooms, Pompeii reminds us of something simple and enduring. To live is to leave a trace. Among the echoes of stone and silence, amid the frescoed walls and shattered urns, it is the children who remain the most haunting. Not because they are more tragic, but because they were more innocent, so unknowing, so unready for the fire that would steal the world from beneath their feet. Pompeii was a city of families. Though it gleamed with wealth and artistry, its pulse came from its people, bakers and butchers, dancers and scribes, mothers and their little ones. On any given day before the eruption, you might have heard the laughter of children rise above the splash of fountains and the murmur of traders in the forum. They played in alleys, darting between carts, chasing balls of tightly bound cloth. They raced across stepping stones, feet bare, calling to one another in Latin too quick for formality. They tugged at their mothers' tunics, begged for sweet dates from vendors, and held their fathers' hands as they wandered the marketplace. They lived in a world of colour, bright wall paintings, red-tiled roofs, marbled statues, and sunlit courtyards. And then, the sky turned black. When the eruption began, many children were gathered in their homes, napping after midday meals or helping with evening chores. Some were in school, scribbling letters on wax tablets. Others followed their parents to the baths, the forum, or temples. We know this not from written records, but from the voids in the ash. Archaeologists, with reverent hands and quiet breaths, have uncovered the forms of many small bodies. Arms, curled, knees drawn, faces turned away from the heat they could not escape. In a small house near the city's edge, 3 children were found huddled beneath a table. The cast reveals the smallest one clutching what appears to be a doll, an object lost to time but preserved in its outline. The child must have believed in that final moment that a hiding place and a friend of cloth might be enough. In another home, close to the central bathhouse, a young boy had been caught mid-run in the atrium. His arms were outstretched as though reaching for someone just ahead or trying to fly away. He wore a belt with decorative bronze studs. The metal outlasted the body. His name is unknown, but his story endures in posture. In the barracks of the gladiators, not far from the amphitheatre, remains of children were found alongside adult men. It is likely they were the sons of slaves or apprentices learning the hard life of the arena. One of them had a wooden toy sword at his side. The children of Pompeii did not die as children should. not with time to grow, to stumble through love, to carve their names into the walls of life. They were stolen mid-play, mid-dream, mid-lullaby, and yet they are still here. The plaster casts of their forms are gentle, even sacred. In their final shapes, there is often no panic, just the stillness of sleep. Many likely died instantly in the pyroclastic surges, the waves of gas and heat that surged through the city before dawn. For them, the end may have come so swiftly that fear had no time to bloom. In the centuries that followed, it was easy for scholars and historians to focus on architecture, politics, the great mosaic of Roman culture. But it is the children who demand a softer gaze, one that sees not strategy or empire, but the universality of human vulnerability. Their rooms are small, their possessions few. In one villa, a child's bronze rattle was discovered near a cot. In another, a tiny sandal lay beneath a collapsed beam. In a garden atrium, a little cup carved from bone rested beside a flower pot. They are simple things, ordinary, but they pull at the heart more than any golden statue. These were children who spoke Latin lullabies, who knew the taste of honeyed milk and the stories of Hercules and Persephone. They played beneath frescoes of nymphs and gods, and perhaps believed those painted figures watched over them. One particularly striking fresco shows Eros, Cupid, sleeping with his bow beside him, a gentle smile on his lips. He is the god of love, but here he is a child. The painting hung in a hallway of a modest home. The child who walked past it each day may have imagined himself as Eros, small, important, cradled in beauty. It is difficult not to weep for what they never saw. The next solstice, a first kiss. The day they would have painted their own names on walls or placed coins in the temple box for good fortune. Yet Pompeii preserved them as if to say, they mattered. Their lives, however brief, were etched into the earth, and in their silence, they speak across time. Today, visitors who walk through the ruins sometimes come upon those casts without warning. It stops them. The laughter of tour groups fades, cameras lower. There, behind a glass barrier, or sheltered under a portico, lies the delicate form of a life once lit with breath. No empire remembers its children. History seldom does. But Pompeii, frozen, paused, waiting, does not forget. Each frescoed wall, each painted room, each quiet corner where a toy or a bone was found, serves as a soft, unshouting eulogy. The children of Pompeii are not relics. They are reminders of how fleeting life is, of how even the smallest heartbeat can echo through stone, of how beauty is not in survival alone, but in memory. And so, in each dusty footprint that once held a child's step, we find the pulse of a world, lost and found again. In every culture, food is memory. It is ritual, comfort, celebration, and daily rhythm. In Pompeii, food was all of these things, woven into the fabric of life with olive oil, fresh bread, and garum, that pungent Roman sauce of fermented fish that filled amphorae and kitchens alike. To walk Pompeii's streets today is to encounter remnants of this culinary world. Bakeries still bearing carbonized loaves, taverns with marble counters, frescoes of figs, pomegranates, and platters of game birds. It is to taste the ghost of flavor, of feasts halted mid-bite. The final meals of Pompeii were never intended to be final. In the hours before the eruption, ovens were hot. Markets bustled with vendors shouting over baskets of olives, nuts, and grapes. Amphorae of wine were tapped. Dates were wrapped in honey and stuffed with pine nuts. Fish sizzled over coals. In the homes of the wealthy, feasts were being prepared. Slaves chopped herbs, roasted dormice with poppy seeds and honey, and stewed lentils in clay pots. Platters were polished, garlands hung, musicians rehearsed in garden courtyards. In the villa of the Pompeii, dinner may have been planned beneath the gaze of bronze busts of philosophers and poets. Cicero, Seneca, and Epicurus watched from niches as grapes were rinsed and flatbread was kneaded by hand. Then all went still. The eruption stopped no clock, but it marked an end far deeper than midnight. Food was abandoned where it sat. Platters overturned. Tables stood half set. In kitchens, bread rose until it overproofed, untouched by hands too busy fleeing or too still to move. Excavators found carbonized loaves in several bakeries, their crusts split but unmistakably round, marked with the stamps of the bakers who made them. Some bore names: Sella, Faustus, Rufus. Their legacy is not in statue or scroll, but in bread left behind. One loaf found in the oven of a modest bakery bore the imprint of 8 wedges, sliced like a wheel, designed to be shared. Who was it for? A family supper, a tavern table, a temple offering? We cannot know. In the house of the gladiators, bones of goats and chickens were found beside amphorae of watered wine. It was a humble meal, likely for men used to training hard and eating fast. Perhaps they had just returned from the arena. Perhaps they were resting, unaware of the mountain's awakening. In another home, a table had been laid with figs, dates, and walnuts, now fossilized in ash. A small jug of wine sat uncorked nearby. The floor showed signs of recent sweeping. A dinner was coming. One of the most poignant discoveries was in the kitchen of a tavern along the Via dell'Abbondanza. There, pots still sat on stoves. Lentils and grains were found, their shapes preserved in carbon. A charcoal sketch above the doorway showed Mercury, the god of travelers and commerce, as if blessing each meal that passed from pot to patron. It was not only food that lingered. Thermopolia, Pompeii's version of street food stalls, lined the city streets. Some had built-in dolia, large storage jars sunk into the marble counter, kept cool and ready for serving stew, cheese, pickled vegetables, or spiced sausage. Customers would have gathered there daily, standing or sitting on low benches, sipping, wine cut with water, talking of politics, or lovers, or dreams. In one such shop, an ornate fresco was found on the front wall. A rooster, a duck, and a hound standing before a silver platter. The owner had taken pride in his offerings, or perhaps had a sense of humor. Humor and hunger, never far apart. The wealthy lived differently, of course. In villas with inner gardens and colonnades, meals were lavish. Dozens of courses served upon silver trays. Peacocks glazed in wine, eel in coriander, fresh oysters with pepper and vinegar. Musicians strummed lyres as guests reclined on couches, eating with fingers or small spoons. But even they were caught in the fire. In one elegant triclinium, a Roman dining room, archaeologists found broken dishes and a half-finished mural of Neptune and Amphitrite. Paint pots and brushes had been abandoned. The feast, it seems, had been meant to impress. Now, only the ghost of intention remained. What stirs the heart most are the tiny traces. A lemon seed caught in a drain, a fig branch charred in the corner of a courtyard, shells of snails once cooked with herbs, the bones of a songbird, perhaps caught mid-preparation or flown into the wrong window. Even in death, the city's appetite remains. Food in Pompeii was more than sustenance. It was offering. It was identity. Bakers stamped their names into loaves because bread was pride. Tavern owners painted menus onto walls because food was promise. Families built hearths at the center of homes because cooking was sacred. When Vesuvius erupted, it didn't simply bury a place. It buried a taste, a rhythm, a sensory world that historians and chefs still try to recover. Today, chefs and archaeologists alike pore over carbonized remnants, tracing spice patterns, recreating recipes. Garum, once thought too pungent to revive, is now made again in small batches based on ancient notes. Modern recreations of Pompeian bread, with its bran-heavy texture and wedge-shaped scoring, appear on dinner tables far from Italy. Even the simple olive, pressed, pickled, sliced, tells a story of continuity. And in that continuity, Pompeii endures. It endures in kitchens where a cook dusts cinnamon over honeyed fruit, in bakeries where loaves are cut into 8 and handed out still warm, in the crackle of fire beneath a pot, and the laughter of guests leaning into stories over wine. Pompeii's last feast was not its final one, because to eat, to gather, to remember what once was tasted, that too is a kind of resurrection. Long after the fires died and the ash hardened into history, the silence that blanketed Pompeii remained deep, but never empty. For beneath the layers of volcanic stone and powdered ruin, there were voices still speaking. Not in shouts or cries, but in fragments. A scribbled word, a cracked scroll, the pressed edge of a ring upon a forgotten finger. Whispers, subtle and persistent, awaited rediscovery. No voice was louder in this hush than that of the written word, though many imagine. Ancient Rome as a place of orators and marble, it was also a world obsessed with writing. Pompeii was no exception. The city teemed with messages, formal and informal, sacred and profane, left on every imaginable surface. Graffiti was only the beginning. Along the walls of the basilica and within the entryways of private homes, announcements and poems were scratched in hurried strokes. Some were love notes. Marcellus, my heart is yours. Others, biting criticisms. The one who stole my tunic. May the gods curse your wine forever. There were business advertisements, election slogans, even bawdy jokes. But beyond these fleeting scratches were more enduring whispers, those hidden in scrolls and libraries. Though Pompeii's own library has not survived in full, its sister, city Herculaneum, similarly buried by Vesuvius, yielded a treasure trove of texts. In the Villa of the Papyri, named for the vast collection found there, over 1,800 carbonized scrolls were discovered, perfectly sealed by ash and heat. They were not readable at first. Charred and brittle, they looked like lumps of coal. Early attempts to unroll them destroyed more than they revealed, but the scrolls held on to their secrets, quiet yet alive. Centuries later, modern science brought hope. With the invention of CT scanning and multispectral imaging, researchers began to peer inside without unrolling. Ink, once invisible, began to shine under new light. Greek texts emerged, lines from Epicurean philosophers, poems, discussions of ethics, beauty, and the soul. Each phrase, resurrected from ash, felt like a whisper returned from the underworld. Pompeii, too, held knowledge, though in different form. In schools, children learned to read and write using wax tablets, wooden boards coated in dark wax, inscribed with a stylus and erased with heat. A classroom found near the forum still held benches and tablet fragments, the marks of pupils' lessons faint but decipherable. There, young voices once recited the Aeneid, the laws of the Republic, and simple arithmetic. They wrote their names, over and over, eager to leave a mark, and in the homes of the educated, styluses and inkpots were found alongside scroll fragments. A bronze inkwell, still capped. A tablet bearing a personal note. Don't forget the oil. Even in casual reminders, the humanity shines. Writing, for the people of Pompeii, was more than function. It was connection. A message scratched into a wall might outlive a whisper carried by air. And in this, perhaps, they succeeded beyond imagining. Because the words remain. In one atrium, a painted panel held a phrase in elegant Latin, "Nothing is eternal." A philosopher's lament, or simply an artist's whim. Either way, it endures, painted with care, preserved in catastrophe. And not all. Whispers were meant for human ears. Shrines or lararia stood in nearly every home. These sacred niches housed images of household gods, lares and penates, guardians of hearth and family. Offerings were left, wine, grain, sometimes coins. Incantations were murmured in morning light. Prayers drifted with the incense, asking for health, fortune, and safe passage. Even in death, many clung to these rituals. In one collapsed house, a family was found huddled beneath the Narration. The figure of Mercury stood above them, his paint faint but visible, his wings spread as if to carry them home. A few coins lay at the base, one last offering in the shadow of doom. These small rites were not theatrical. They were everyday, a quiet conversation between mortal and divine, whispers upon whispers, and still deeper, beyond writing and prayer, Pompeii speaks through the arrangement of things. A table left set, a door left open, a lamp fallen mid-hallway. These positions are not random. They are echoes of choice, of motion stopped mid-step. In the house of the tragic poet, famous for its mosaic of a snarling dog and the inscription, Cave Canem, one room preserved its contents so perfectly that it seemed the family had only just departed. A comb, a necklace, a cup turned sideways. These are not relics. They are memories. The air itself held stories. Pollen samples from soil layers revealed what grew in Pompeii's final days: rosemary, myrtle, olive, and pine. A gust of wind today still carries those scents across the bay, bridging the modern and the ancient in an invisible thread. Even the architecture whispers. Rooms were built around light. Courtyards welcomed birdsong. Water was drawn to trickle through channels not just for need, but for beauty. Pompeians knew how to listen to their surroundings, and in return, their surroundings now speak for them. To hear it all, one must listen slowly, not with urgency, but with openness, to stand in the shadow of a half-preserved arch and let the hush settle. To brush a hand along stone still warm from the afternoon sun, and imagine a hand doing the same 2,000 years ago. To read a word, scratched by an unknown soul, and feel that person lean forward into time. Pompeii's true gift is not in grandeur, but in gentleness. It does not shout its history, it breathes it. Through crumbled walls, half-formed words, and the lingering smoke of incense last burned in a world undone by fire. It is not a city of ruins, it is a city of whispers, and those whispers wait patiently for anyone who chooses to hear them. There are places in Pompeii where time does not merely sleep, it watches. It watches from behind collapsed doorways, through broken archways, from beneath the smooth crust of ash, where faces were once warm and alive. Faces of people, men, women, children, preserved not by art or imagination, but by fire, absence, and an eerie, accidental grace. These faces are not carved into marble, nor painted in idealized beauty. They are real, and they were discovered slowly, with trembling reverence. As archaeologists realized, the voids they encountered in hardened ash were not random. They were remnants of flesh, vanished long ago, but leaving behind their shapes, shelled impressions of final moments. In the 1860s, Giuseppe Fiorelli introduced the method that would bring them back, pouring plaster into the cavities left by decomposed bodies. The result was astonishing. Humans reappeared, not as skeletons, but as people, caught in the act of dying, or perhaps of living until they could live no more. They are not sculptures. They are echoes of skin and breath. One of the most iconic figures is known as the muleteer. He lies on his side, face twisted away, one arm bent beneath his head as though he had lain down to rest. His belt, with its heavy bronze buckle, still encircles his waist. His shoes are clearly outlined, his ribs faintly visible. He was once a traveller, perhaps, or a cart driver. He died far from his animals, far from the road. There is a man discovered near the Stabian Gate, often called the Contemplator. He sits upright, arms wrapped loosely around his knees, head bowed as if in thought, or perhaps in acceptance. He has no name, but his posture feels painfully human. Someone who faced the end, not in flight, but in stillness. And then there is the dog, chained to a post, its body contorted in violent agony. It remains one of the most haunting images from the city. Its legs are twisted, its back arched in a final, futile effort to escape the burning surge. A creature so loyal it stayed, so helpless it died alone. Its collar, with metal rings, still visible. But most tender are the couples. In one building, later named the House of the Fugitives, 13 bodies were found in a vaulted corridor, clustered together. Among them, 2 figures, presumed to be a young man and a woman, lie with arms reaching toward one another. Their fingers nearly touch, as if even in the moment of death, love was stronger than fear. Another pair, found in the Garden of the Fugitives, were once believed to be mother and child. Later scans suggested both were young adults. Regardless of relation, their bond is evident. One curls protectively around the other, an embrace so deeply human that it transcends centuries. There are children too. Their faces are smaller, softer, their limbs drawn in tight, as though they sought warmth in a world suddenly stripped of it. One, perhaps no more than 3 years old, was found near a doorway. Was she trying to run, or had she simply followed a parent too late? The expressions of the plaster casts are subtle, but profound. There is no screaming mouth, no horror frozen in cartoonish display. Most died in an instant, succumbed to heat so intense their lives ended before pain could register. And yet the bodies tell stories in curvature, in gesture, in where they fell. One man fell face down, hands clutched to his sides, legs bent as though he had been running. Another woman lies face up, her head tilted, as if searching the sky for mercy. In these forms, art meets truth. They are not dramatized. They are not stylized. They are honest, brutally and beautifully so. For the first time in archaeological history, we were not imagining the past. It was staring back. Their clothing often remained, reduced to faint impressions, the drape of a tunic, the cinch of a belt, the trace of sandals. Rings were found on fingers, earrings glinted in the dust. One man wore a money pouch at his waist, still full of coins. He had hoped to escape with his savings, to start again, somewhere safe. And the city's layout gave further context. Many died near doorways, caught in flight. Others in cellars, believing the stone above would protect them. Still others on rooftops, where they had fled from ash only to be overwhelmed by fire. Their decisions, small and desperate, give us insight into the psychology of disaster. What is remarkable is how equal death was. Slave and senator, child and centurion, none was spared by the surge. The mountain cared not for birth or rank. Its fire wrote no elegies, carved no names. But the ash did something the empire could not. It preserved everyone the same. And so, the faces beneath the stone now form a gallery of humanity. Not heroes, not villains, just people. People with plans for the next morning, people with secrets, people with someone waiting. Their time did not allow for farewells, yet their postures say what words could not. Even now, to walk among the casts is to feel watched, not in fear, but in presence. They are not ghosts to be feared, but witnesses. They have already endured the worst, and in doing so, became something greater than survivors. They became the storytellers. Their silence is not absence, but invitation. Look closer, they seem to say. Feel what it is to live before knowing you are about to vanish. Hear the sound of your own breath as you gaze upon the place where theirs was taken. For in each face, each hand, each unspoken gesture, Pompeii speaks not of destruction, but of a life so real it refused to be erased. Not all who lived in Pompeii perished beneath its final storm. Some escaped, by fate, by chance, by decision made in the narrowing corridor between sky and fire. They fled with only what they could carry, or with nothing at all. They did not leave as victors, but as witnesses. And in their survival, they bore the heaviest burden of all: memory. We know little about them, those few who outran Vesuvius. They left no monuments, no great histories in their names. They were bakers, merchants, midwives, freed slaves, and young boys who had wandered to the countryside on errands. Most of their lives were swept into the same silence as the city they fled. But traces of them linger. Some may have sought shelter in nearby towns, Nola, Stabiae, or Messinum, where the famed naturalist Pliny the Elder met his end. Others, likely, wandered further, toward Naples or even Rome, carrying rumours of a mountain that had turned the sky to stone. In letters and records outside Pompeii, we find flickers of their voices. Pliny the Younger, nephew of the admiral who died attempting a rescue, would later write 2 letters to the historian Tacitus, describing what he saw from across the bay at Messinum. His words remain our most vivid contemporary account. A cloud, from which mountain I was not sure at first, but afterward learned to be Vesuvius, was ascending in appearance like a pine tree. He wrote of people fleeing with pillows on, their heads to protect from falling stones, of tremors that rocked the ground and the sea pulling away from the shore, of night so black one could not see the hand in front of the face, and of voices calling, wailing, praying. His uncle, Pliny the Elder, had boarded ships and sailed directly into danger. He died on the coast, likely overcome by the sulphurous fumes. But others turned away from the shore and ran. One set of skeletal remains, found near the New Syrian Gate, was discovered alongside a stash of silver coins, a bronze lamp, and a small bundle of clothing. Scholars believe this person was in the act of fleeing, just moments too late, but others made it out, and among them may have been a woman named Julia Felix. She owned a large and beautiful estate in Pompeii, known for its gardens and private baths, which she had opened to the public after the 62 AD earthquake. She was wealthy, independent, and resourceful. Her name appears in multiple inscriptions, including notices of her rental properties. It is believed she may have survived, her estate showing signs of early excavation and abandonment, as if someone had returned to salvage what they could. Some survivors tried to reclaim pieces of their past. In the years following the eruption, a few daring souls returned to the buried city. Tunnels were dug, items retrieved, statues removed. But the ground was treacherous, the ash unstable. Efforts were often abandoned. Pompeii began to fade, not only from sight, but from collective Roman memory. Yet for those who had fled, it never disappeared. Imagine what it must have been to carry that memory, to stand at the edge of a new town, clutching the hand of a child who asked, "Where is home?" and to answer with a silence that could never explain the scale of what had been lost. To remember the colour of frescoes, the warmth of baths, the rhythm of footsteps along the Via dell'Abbondanza, and to know none would ever be heard again. To dream of a feast table left behind, the scent of honeyed cake still in the air, the laughter of friends as wine spilled on marble, and to wake alone in a borrowed room. Survivors do not always tell their stories. Some are too broken, others too burdened. And yet, memory has a way of surviving even where words fail. Perhaps a survivor described Pompeii to a sculptor, inspiring a scene carved into a villa wall far from Naples. Perhaps a child of a survivor told their own children, "There was once a place of music and figs and painted gods," but it vanished in a single night. In this way, the memory passed like wind through olive groves, invisible but present, and, still, the mountain stood. Vesuvius did not erupt again for centuries. Its slopes grew green, goats grazed upon its lower flanks, vineyards flourished in the volcanic soil. But to those who had watched the fire, it was never just a mountain again. They had seen it breathe flame. They had watched it swallow a city whole. Some may have kept small tokens, a ring retrieved from rubble, a coin blackened by heat. Others carried nothing but the memory of faces, of names unspoken since the ash fell. To survive is a kind of exile. It means continuing when others cannot. It means living with the question, why me? And perhaps for the survivors of Pompeii, that question echoed louder than any prayer. Yet within their silent endurance, lies something sacred. Because they remembered, we now remember. Because they escaped, their story reached beyond the smoke. Because they lived, the world came to know what Pompeii had been. They became, unwittingly, the custodians of a vanished world. And in every modern retelling, in every museum exhibit, fresco recreation, or whispered tour guide story, they live again. Not in name, perhaps, but in echo. They are the ones who stood on the edge of ash and chose life. They are the ones who watched the mountain burn. For centuries, Pompeii lay in forgotten slumber. Its name faded, its location lost beneath fields of olives and vineyards, nourished unknowingly by the same ash that once killed. Shepherds wandered across the ground, under which entire streets rested. Occasionally, fragments surfaced, columns, bits of pottery, but the earth held its secrets with jealous quiet. Then, as the world turned toward the Enlightenment, curiosity stirred. In the early 18th century, under the reign of the Bourbon kings of Naples, interest in the buried towns around Mount Vesuvius was revived, not for knowledge, but for treasure. Men dug not with care, but with greed, hoping to unearth marbles, gold, and artifacts worthy of palaces. In 1738, the nearby city of Herculaneum was the first to be seriously excavated. There, beneath hardened volcanic mud, entire buildings emerged, frescoes and furniture miraculously preserved. Word spread quickly. 10 years later, in 1748, the first deliberate dig at Pompeii began. What they uncovered changed not only archaeology, but the imagination of the modern world. Unlike Herculaneum's compact density, Pompeii lay beneath layers of softer ash and pumice, allowing easier excavation. Streets reappeared, then doorways, rooms full of pottery, frescoed walls still vibrant in ochre and cobalt. A world not collapsed, but paused. It was as if the city had taken a deep breath and never exhaled. At first, the dig was slow, disjointed. Sites were stripped of valuables and left exposed. Statues were shipped to Naples, frescoes cut from walls. The early explorers were treasure hunters more than historians. Yet even in their clumsy rush, the gravity of Pompeii could not be denied. By the late 1700s, artists, writers, and thinkers from across Europe flocked to see the ruins. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, the German poet and statesman, visited in 1787. He walked the ancient streets, stood in awe before the amphitheatre, and later wrote, "Many disasters have befallen the world, but few have brought such joy to posterity." In Pompeii's death, he found eternal life. What made the city so powerful to the modern mind was its intimacy. This was not a tale of emperors or grand battles. This was a story of houses, of shop signs, of wall graffiti and bread ovens. It was a domestic resurrection, a reawakening of the human. And then came Giuseppe Fiorelli, appointed director of excavations in 1860. Fiorelli brought method to chaos. He introduced a systematic street-by-street excavation plan. More importantly, he revolutionized the interpretation of Pompeii by caring not just for objects, but for people. It was Fiorelli who invented the casting technique that gave us the haunting plaster figures of Pompeii's victims. His discovery, that voids in the ash were once human bodies, allowed the dead to be seen again, not as bones, but as beings. These casts became global symbols. They were displayed in photographs, sketches, and exhibitions. Suddenly, the abstract concept of an ancient Roman became tangible. You could see the curve of a mother's arm around her child. You could see a man's hand over his mouth, his fingers tensed in final resistance. Fiorelli also introduced cataloguing and labeling. Each house was given a location number. Inscriptions were carefully transcribed. Artifacts were logged and stored. Under his guidance, Pompeii became not a ruin, but an archaeological canvas. As the 20th century dawned, new technologies brought new revelations. Stratigraphy allowed for better dating of layers. Pollen analysis revealed ancient flora. Carbonization techniques dated food remains. Radiography helped peek into sealed containers. Each advancement painted Pompeii in sharper detail. But the rediscovery didn't just affect archaeologists, it changed how the world saw Rome. Until Pompeii, Roman life was imagined only through elite sources: Cicero, Livy, Tacitus. Now, ordinary life came into view: taverns, bathhouses, apartments, graffiti. The Roman Empire was no longer just Senate floors and marble busts. It was bread ovens, family shrines, and marketplaces. Art, literature, and even fashion changed. In the 18th and 19th centuries, a wave of neoclassicism swept Europe. Dresses inspired by Roman stolae, villas designed to echo Pompeian atriums. Artists painted scenes of ancient life, modelled on the ruins. Even cuisine adapted. Cookbooks reimagining Roman meals based on what was found in kitchens under ash. Writers, too, found inspiration. Edward Bulwer Lytton's 1834 novel, The Last Days of Pompeii, romanticized the city's fall and introduced it to readers across the English-speaking world. In it, fiction walked alongside history, and the flames of Vesuvius were cast in dramatic, tragic light. Filmmakers followed suit. Pompeii appeared in silent cinema, in epic films of the 1950s, and in digital recreations of the 21st century. The image of the fleeing citizen, the dog in chains, the lovers in embrace. These became symbols beyond archaeology. They became myth. Yet for all the spectacle, the true gift of Pompeii's rediscovery was something quieter. It reminded humanity of its vulnerability, that a vibrant, complex city could vanish in hours, buried by forces it could neither predict nor control. That life, in all its colour, could be reduced to ash and yet somehow survive, not in flesh, but in gesture, in habit, in art. Pompeii's rediscovery did not just uncover a city, it reawakened an empathy across time. Visitors today still walk those streets with reverence. They pause before doorways, peer into kitchens, trace frescoes with their eyes. And in doing so, they cross an invisible threshold, not merely seeing the past, but feeling it breathe. No other place does this quite the same, because no other place has died so suddenly, and yet lived so completely in its death. There is something unshakably intimate about Pompeii. Perhaps it is the stillness, the feeling of entering a space where time did not run forward, but rather curled in upon itself. Perhaps it is the sight of footprints in ancient stone, or the quiet of a courtyard where someone once watered potted laurel. But more than any fresco, cast or crumbled wall, Pompeii teaches us because it reminds us of ourselves. Though its stones are Roman, its lessons are timeless. Lesson 1. Life is fragile. It is easy to believe that civilizations, cities, and lives are permanent. But Pompeii tells a different story. Here was a town thriving, full of laughter, food, debates, and dreams. And then, without warning, a single afternoon unraveled everything. Not through war, not through politics, but through nature, through fire from the sky. This fragility lingers in every doorway left half open, in every table still laid for dinner, in every room where sandals and oil lamps lay untouched. Pompeii tells us that life is precious because it is not promised. Lesson 2. The ordinary matters. When archaeologists first began their work, they were searching for gold, statues, and grand temples. But the true treasure of Pompeii lay elsewhere, in bakeries, in graffiti, in bits of pottery and forgotten toys. Pompeii teaches that the beauty of history is not only in its emperors and generals, but in the cobbler's last pair of shoes, in the scribbled joke on a tavern wall, in the mosaic of a dog with the words "Cave Canem." Beware of the dog. The things we most take for granted, the shape of a spoon, the scratch of a signature, the last letter home, are the things that speak loudest across time. Lesson 3. Memory can be made of dust time erodes. Fire consumes, but memory can endure in strange ways. Pompeii was not remembered through legend or song. It was remembered through accident, through the way ash preserved the shape of a curled hand, or how pumice hardened around the body of a child. Memory in Pompeii is not carved in marble, it is whispered in traces. And so the city asks us, what will remain of us? Not what we say, but what we leave behind, how we loved, how we lived, how we treated those around us. Perhaps that too will be the shape we cast. Lesson 4. Nature is unpredictable. Mount Vesuvius had slept for centuries. It was not feared. Its slopes were green, its vineyards rich. People built their homes close, basked in its bounty, never imagining it could burn. Pompeii teaches the lesson of humility, that even in peace, danger may stir below, that even the calmest morning sky may darken, yet it also teaches reverence. For nature, when feared, may destroy, but when respected, it sustains. Today the soils of Campania are rich because of Vesuvius. The volcano took, but it also gave. And in this cycle of destruction and fertility lies one of Earth's oldest truths. Lesson 5. Art outlives. Using Pompeii, the walls are still painted. The myths are still dancing. The gods are still gazing. What mortal voice would have imagined that a fresco of Bacchus painted on a dining room wall would survive the fall of Rome, the rise of nations, and 2,000 years of silence? And yet, it has. Colour preserved by catastrophe, art cradled by ash. Pompeii teaches us that art, when born of life, not vanity, can become immortal, not in gold, but in meaning. The girl who painted birds in her courtyard, the man who scratched a poem to his absent love, the baker who stamped his name in bread, they are still here. Lesson 6. Stillness is not emptiness. Many who visit Pompeii describe a strange hush. It is not eerie, it is sacred. The streets are quiet not because they are abandoned, but because they are listening. In a world that rushes endlessly forward, Pompeii reminds us to be still, to look at the grain in the stone, to trace the edge of a bench worn by centuries of sitting, to close one's eyes and feel, not just observe. The dead do not cry out, but they invite us into their last breath, not to frighten, but to guide. Lesson 7. We are more alike than we realize. At first glance, ancient Pompeians may seem foreign, clothed in tunics, praying to strange gods, dining in ways unfamiliar. But look closer. They argued over taxes. They gossiped. They loved fiercely. They protected their children. They wrote rude jokes on walls. They toasted at dinners. They feared loss. They tried to leave something behind. In their final moments, they reached for one another. They ran to family. They held tight to symbols of home, a ring, a lamp, a wooden doll. Pompeii teaches that across language, faith, and time, we are not so different. We love, we laugh, we live, and we leave. And perhaps that is the truest lesson of all, that the past is not past, that Pompeii, though buried, was never truly lost. It was waiting, beneath centuries of dust, for us to remember and to learn. And now that we have, we must not forget. Pompeii is more than a city. It is a breath held across millennia, a heartbeat pulsing faintly beneath stone, fresco, and ash. And like all fragile things that whisper rather than shout, it must be protected with care, patience, and reverence. 2. Preserve Pompeii is not to freeze it, nor to polish it into something artificial. It is to listen, to study, to shield it gently from the very forces that once erased it: time, nature, and neglect. This duty has fallen to many hands over the past 2 centuries. The first protectors. When excavations began in earnest during the 18th century, there was no modern concept of conservation. Pompeii was seen as a storehouse of beauty to be mined. Paintings were cut from walls, statues shipped to Naples, treasures were removed, and buildings left exposed to weather and decay. The city cried softly beneath such hands. Then came a shift. Scholars began to see not just individual objects, but the entire city as a living artifact. Giuseppe Fiorelli, in the 19th century, was among the first to treat Pompeii as a place of cultural memory. He introduced systematic excavation, catalogued every house, every inscription. His plaster casting technique gave shape to the city's final witnesses. But still, the elements pressed in. The battle against time, unlike Herculaneum, which was sealed. In dense volcanic mud, Pompeii was preserved by soft ash. Once unearthed, that ash no longer protected, it exposed. Walls faded. Rain eroded frescoes. Tourists, even well-meaning ones, left behind footprints, breath, and the invisible oils of human touch. By the 20th century, the need for preservation was urgent. Cracks appeared not just in stone, but in the very spirit of the site. Theft increased. Entire mosaics were looted. Walls collapsed. In 2010, the world watched in dismay as the House of the Gladiators crumbled in a landslide of neglect and underfunding. But Pompeii, like the people who once lived there, has always endured. A new era of stewardship. In recent decades, a global effort has emerged, not merely to display Pompeii, but to protect her. The European Union and Italian government launched the Great Pompeii Project in 2012, committing over $100 million to stabilize, conserve, and restore threatened areas. Archaeologists, engineers, historians, and digital preservationists joined hands in what became one of the largest conservation efforts in archaeological history. Roofs were repaired, frescoes were gently cleaned with lasers, drainage systems were installed to keep rainwater from pooling. Walls were reinforced, using traditional Roman building techniques to respect the integrity of the structures. In a quiet house near the Via del Vesuvio, a long faded fresco of a reclining Bacchus was returned to view, his grapes vivid again, his smile eternal. Science meets legacy. Today, preservation is not guesswork. It is a science. Digital mapping has scanned the entire city in 3D, down to the smallest brick. Thermography detects hidden weaknesses in walls. Drones monitor structural shifts. AI models help prioritize which areas are at risk of collapse. Organic remains, seeds, bones, bread, are stored in climate-controlled archives. DNA sequencing of human remains offers insight into Pompeii's diverse population. Scientists now know that the city was home to people from across the Roman world. Syrians, North Africans, Gauls, all living, working, and dying together. Preservation is not about keeping the past locked away. It is about ensuring it can still speak. The role of the modern visitor. Today, over 2 million people walk Pompeii's streets each year. They come from every corner of the earth, drawn not by spectacle, but by something more subtle, the longing to understand life as it once was. But every step, every breath, every camera flash takes a toll. So modern visitors are asked to become stewards, to tread lightly, to respect silence, to recognize that they are not merely spectators, but inheritors of something profound. Interpretive paths have been created to direct foot traffic. Many areas are now protected by glass or viewed via virtual tours. Replicas of fragile artifacts are shown while the originals rest in curated safety. The philosophy is simple. Show what can be shown, guard what cannot. The eternal watchers beyond scientists and tourists, there are those who spend their lives among Pompeii's stones. The custodians, the restorers, the local guides whose grandparents once worked on the early digs, the archaeologists who return summer after summer, brushing away dust, inch by inch, uncovering a new fragment of daily life, a coin, a comb, a painted bird. For them, Pompeii is not a job, it is a calling. They learn the city's moods, how the walls breathe after rain, how the colors shift in late light. They speak to the site as one might speak to an aging loved one, gently, attentively, with deep care. And it is through them that the city continues to breathe. A global responsibility, preserving Pompeii is not just Italy's task. It belongs to all of us. It is a reminder of what can be lost and what can be saved. A mirror held up to the fragility of civilization. A humbling monument that says, "You too are mortal. You too build cities upon trembling ground." Today, schools across the world teach Pompeii not merely as history, but as a human story. Museums stage immersive exhibits. Films, books, and digital reconstructions bring the city to new generations. But no film, no replica, no textbook can replace the feeling of standing in a Pompeian room and hearing silence echo against walls that once rang with laughter. That silence is precious, and it must be protected. For in that silence lives not only the memory of a single city, but the question it leaves us with. How will we be remembered? Long after the smoke faded and the ash cooled, Pompeii rose again, not from stone or soil, but from dreams. It rose in paint and poem, in theatre and film, in whispered stories told by firelight. For what was lost in flame was found again in imagination. And in this realm, Pompeii became not just a city frozen in time, but a canvas for longing, mourning, and wonder. Pompeii in myth. Though its name is Roman, Pompeii began to take on mythic proportions soon after its rediscovery. To the 18th and 19th century mind, it was not merely a ruin, it was a message from the gods, a parable of pride and punishment, decadence and downfall. Writers and moralists drew comparisons between Pompeii and biblical cities like Sodom and Gomorrah. The suddenness of the destruction, the people caught in pleasure, the sky turning black, felt almost divinely ordained. To the Victorian imagination especially, Pompeii was a city of sin. They imagined sensual feasts, orgiastic cults, careless, luxury. The eruption became, in this vision, a cosmic judgment. Never mind that Pompeii was a working city, home to ordinary labourers and quiet family rituals. Myth seldom needs accuracy. It needs resonance. And Pompeii resonated deeply. Pompeii in literature. Perhaps no single work did more to enshrine Pompeii in literary imagination than Edward Bulwer Lytton's The Last Days of Pompeii, first published in 1834, inspired by early excavations. Bulwer Lytton created a romantic, tragic narrative. A noble Greek, a beautiful Christian girl, a cruel Egyptian priest. Against the backdrop of temples and love triangles, the volcano looms, a shadow of fate. The novel was wildly successful, reprinted in dozens of languages. It painted Pompeii as a place of dramatic tension and doomed beauty. Readers wept for its characters, then looked with new reverence at the real ruins. But Pompeii appeared in other texts too, more subtly, more metaphorically. In poetry, it became a symbol of silenced voices and buried truth. In essays, a reminder of the fragility of greatness. Mark Twain visited the ruins and remarked on their intimacy. They were not grand, they were personal, and that, he wrote, was what made them unforgettable. Pompeii in art artists too found in Pompeii a muse unlike any other. Painters of the neoclassical period were captivated by what they saw. Frescoes of gods and gardens, bodies curled in ash, mosaics of daily life. They began to create scenes set in Roman interiors, drawing on the colours and architecture uncovered in Pompeii. Jean-Léon Gérôme, Lawrence Alma-Tadema, and Karl Brülow all painted versions of Pompeii, some depicting life before the eruption, others capturing the moment of its fall. Brülow's The Last Day of Pompeii, 1833, became iconic. In it, flames leap across a crowded square. Mothers clutch children. Lovers reach for each other. Priests lift hands to heaven. It is chaos rendered in oil and canvas, theatrical yet moving. More than historical record, these images became meditations on mortality. Artists were drawn to the tension, life so vividly rendered beside death so absolute. And in this contrast, they found not just tragedy, but meaning. Pompeii in music and opera, even composers were stirred. In 1825, Giovanni Puccini debuted L'ultimo giorno di Pompeii, an opera set during the city's last hours. With swelling arias and trembling strings, it told a tale of betrayal, love, and divine wrath, all beneath the ever-threatening volcano. The opera was a success, evoking the mood of a city on the brink of erasure. Later musical works, like Franz Liszt's tone poems or modern cinematic scores, would echo the same themes: fragility, grandeur, finality. Pompeii in cinemas. The silver screen emerged. Pompeii followed. Silent films in the early 1900s recreated the eruption with rudimentary effects. Ash poured from offstage bins. Extras ran through painted sets. But even then, the story was powerful. Audiences watched in awe, perhaps whispering to one another, "What if it happened to us?" In 1935, The Last Days of Pompeii was reimagined as a Hollywood spectacle. It told a sweeping tale of a gladiator, turned hero, caught in the tremors of fate. Later versions, like the 1959 CinemaScope film or the 2014 CGI epic, added romance, rebellion, and volcanic catastrophe. Some were accurate, many were not, but the truth mattered less than the idea. Pompeii had become a stage for human emotion, love, fear, sacrifice, all heightened by the knowledge that everything would soon be ash. Pompeii, in modern imagination, even today, Pompeii lives in stories. Writers craft thrillers set among the ruins. Historians pen speculative essays. What if more had survived? What did they know? What might we still find? In schools, children are told of the city that vanished in a day. They stare at plaster casts and say, "It looks like he's sleeping." Museums recreate rooms from Pompeii, using light and projection to breathe motion back into still walls. Virtual reality tours allow visitors to walk streets as they once were, hearing voices, watching carts roll by, stepping past a dog curled at a merchant's feet. Pompeii, once buried, now lives in more minds than ever before. A myth reclaimed, and, perhaps in all these retellings, we are not mythologizing Pompeii. We are reclaiming it. Not as a place of judgment, but of resonance. A city that feels too much like our own, where art adorns homes, where lovers argue, where children chase shadows, and where life moves forward under the calm illusion that tomorrow is promised. Pompeii in myth is not about lava, it is about love. In art, it is not about death. It is about what we do before it arrives. And in imagination, it is not a ruin, but a mirror into the best and worst of us. Mount Vesuvius rises still. It does not roar, nor send plumes into the sky. Its crater lies calm, kissed by wind and shadow. From afar, it appears benign, just another ridge upon the Neapolitan skyline, crowned with shrubs and slow-drifting clouds. But those who live in its shadow know better. Vesuvius is not dead, it is merely asleep. For over 2,000 years, the mountain has existed as both guardian and threat, bestowing life through rich volcanic soil, then taking it without warning. It is a paradox carved from fire, the source of prosperity and the author of ruin. A sleeping flame. The last major eruption occurred in 1944. During the final year of World War II, as Allied forces advanced through Italy, Vesuvius awoke again. Ash fell on Naples. Lava rolled down the slopes. Bombers from nearby airfields were destroyed. Soldiers, hardened by war, watched in awe as the earth reminded them who held true power. Since then, the volcano has been quiet. But quiet, for Vesuvius, is not comfort. Scientists classify it as an active volcano, capable of erupting again. The current dormancy is the longest in recorded history since 79 AD, and that, to volcanologists, is reason for vigilance. For Vesuvius does not erupt often, but when it does not whisper, it bellows. The red zone today, more than 3 million people live in the immediate vicinity of Vesuvius. It is one of the most densely populated volcanic regions in the world. The area closest to the crater, known as the red zone, encompasses towns and neighborhoods perched upon land, once swept by fire and gas. Towns like Torre del Greco, Ercolano, ancient Herculaneum, and San Sebastiano al Vesuvio bustle with life, shops, schools, markets. Children play beneath the mountain that once devoured entire cities. This coexistence is uneasy. The Italian government has developed evacuation plans, early warning systems, and real-time monitoring. Seismographs hum quietly beneath the soil. Satellites scan the slope daily. Sulfur levels are measured. Every tremor is logged. But questions remain. Would there be enough time? Would roads clog? Would sirens reach all ears? Because Vesuvius, like in 79 AD, may not announce its fury with kindness. The soil of life. Yet for all the risk, few choose to leave. Why? Because Vesuvius gives as much as it takes. The volcanic soil, rich in minerals, is among the most fertile in Europe. Vineyards line the hills. Orchards bloom with apricots, cherries, and almonds. Tomatoes, small and sweet, are grown in black earth, their flavor unmatched. The slopes are home to the famed Lacrima Christi wine, Tears of Christ, made from grapes believed to be blessed by divine sorrow. The story goes that when Lucifer fell from heaven, he seized a piece of paradise. Christ, weeping for its loss, caused the vines on Vesuvius to grow in consolation. And so the land yields abundance. Generations have built homes, cultivated fields, told stories, and whispered prayers, knowing full well that beneath their feet, the mountain waits. Tourism and memory Vesuvius itself is now a destination. Hiking trails lead to the rim of the crater. Visitors peer into the caldera, inhaling sulfur-laced air, imagining the fury once released from its depths. Guides speak of tectonic plates and Roman cities in the same breath. The volcano is no longer just a geological feature. It is a place of pilgrimage. People come to stand where the earth broke open, to see not just rock, but the vast panorama below, the sea, the scattered ruins, the new cities rising from old soil. From this height, history does not feel distant. It feels layered, like ash pressed upon ash. Each step along the volcano's slope is both ascent and descent, a climb toward the sky, a descent into memory. The mountain. As mirror in many ways, Vesuvius is a reflection of human existence. We build upon foundations we cannot see. We live beside power we cannot control. We enjoy moments of quiet, knowing they are never forever, and yet we remain. Perhaps that is what makes Vesuvius so compelling. It is not simply a mountain, it is a metaphor, a sleeping truth, a reminder that beneath the surface of our lives, beneath the cobbled order and painted joy, there are forces larger than us. It teaches humility, it teaches wonder, because it is both cradle and coffin, sculptor and executioner. It shaped the world that created Pompeii, and it ended it. Whispers from the crater local folklore abounds. Some say the spirits of Pompeii rise in mist from the crater each August. Others claim to hear strange wind tones through the rocks near the summit, long, low murmurs like breath returning from the deep. Still others believe that Vesuvius watches, not as a monster, but as a god, older than Jupiter, more ancient than Rome, a being that dreams in magma, that stirs when forgotten. One tale passed down in villages below says that Vesuvius will not erupt again until all of Pompeii is remembered, that each name uncovered, each fresco cleaned, each footprint traced, brings the world closer to balance, as if memory itself might cool the fire. Living in the shadow, to live under Vesuvius, is to accept beauty alongside danger. It is to grow fruit in ground that once burned bodies, to sing lullabies in towns where ancestors fell, to build markets on stone that still remembers heat. It is to know the past intimately, and yet choose to live anyway. And perhaps that is the truest lesson the mountain offers. Not destruction, but resilience. Not fear, but reverence. A volcano is not evil. It is natural. And in its rhythms, in its breath, we glimpse something eternal. A reminder that what begins in fire can, through time and tenderness, become story. And what is story, if not the volcano of the soul, waiting, rumbling, rising to be told? Not every story has an ending. In Pompeii, many stories simply stopped, mid-breath, mid-sentence, mid-step. There was no final word, no farewell, no closing of the door. Instead, the city froze with hands outstretched, hearts half open, lives poised between yesterday and what might have been tomorrow. These are Pompeii's unfinished stories. They lie not only in the plaster casts or the collapsed roofs, but in the smallest fragments: a ring left on a windowsill, an unbaked loaf, a stylus dropped beside a wax tablet where the last word was never completed. In a world so focused on beginnings and ends, Pompeii reminds us that the in-between is just as meaningful. The missing names, we do not know their names. The lovers entwined in the garden of the fugitives, were they betrothed, strangers, siblings? We can measure their height, analyze their clothing, even scan their bones for traces of diet or disease. But we cannot know what they whispered in that final hour, what dreams they held, whose name they called last. A child curled in a storeroom may have had a favorite toy. A sibling who got away, a song that comforted them on stormy nights, but the ash swallowed all but their form. They are silent, yet their silence hums with potential. Each person in Pompeii had a story in progress: a merchant expanding his stall, a seamstress learning a new stitch, a cook testing a new spice blend, a young man composing a poem to leave anonymously on a temple wall, a girl wondering what her wedding day might feel like. These stories never found their second chapter, but their first chapters remain, and that perhaps is enough to feel the pulse of their existence. Objects that speak: a small bronze key found beside a skeleton near the city's gate. A key to what? A lover's home, a strongbox buried beneath the bed. The owner clearly thought it worth bringing. They never made it to the door it belonged to, a note scratched hastily into plaster. I'm going to the forum. Was it meant to reassure a friend? A hurried message before departure? The person never returned to erase it. In a house near the edge of town, a wine jug was found with a message painted on its surface in red: for the banquet. The banquet never came. So many moments half-lived. A banquet not held, a debt not paid, a child not born. And still, these objects remain, gentle relics of possibility. The sculptor's workshop, one of the most poignant sights in Pompeii, is the sculptor's workshop. Tools were still in place, statues half-carved, chisels lay beside, blocks of marble that had just begun to take shape. A bust of a young woman, incomplete, stared eternally from her unfinished perch. Was she a goddess? A noblewoman? A commission left unfulfilled? The sculptor, likely not wealthy, had paused, perhaps to eat, to stretch, to step outside. He never returned, and so his final sculpture remains not as art, but as absence, a promise made to the stone, never kept. But perhaps that makes it more human, because how many of us carry works incomplete? Words unsaid, dreams paused, love unspoken. In Pompeii, these fragments remind us that life is not always completed. It is often interrupted. The silent scrolls in Herculaneum, the sister city of Pompeii, a villa filled with scrolls was uncovered, carbonized by heat, unreadable for centuries. Scholars now believe the collection may include lost works of Epicurus and other ancient philosophers, but most remain unopened, their wisdom hidden. They sit in darkness, waiting. Some have been read using modern imaging techniques, infrared, CT scanning, but many are too fragile. Each one could hold a forgotten play, a vanished poem, a line that might change our understanding of history. The scrolls are symbols of knowledge almost lost, of stories waiting patiently to be heard again. The letters that never arrived post was a regular part of Roman life. Messengers carried letters from city to city, often on wax tablets folded and sealed. In Pompeii, many tablets were found with the stylus still beside them, letters half written or waiting to be sent. One tablet reads simply, "Tell mother I am well." The writer never finished. Did the mother live? Did she wait for a message that never came? We will never know. But the fragment tells us that someone thought of someone else, that even as the sky darkened, connection mattered. Echoes in empty rooms in some houses. The silence feels deeper. The House of the Silver Wedding, so named for its elegance, held vast atriums and painted walls, but no human remains. Did the family escape? Were they away when the eruption began? Or did they flee just in time? The house sits empty, as if waiting for their return. Frescoes depict Venus in her shell, doves fluttering above fountains, Bacchus among the vines. It is not a house of fear, but of grace, a home of laughter now silent, but not sorrowful. The absence here is not tragic, it is respectful. It says, some stories remain untold, not because they ended, but because they continue elsewhere. Pompeii as possibility. Each excavation reveals something new, a shop sign uncovered, a staircase that leads to a room never seen, a child's sandal buried beneath a threshold. And with each, the tapestry grows richer, but the whole story of Pompeii will never be known, and that is not a flaw. It is a gift. For in the spaces between discovery and certainty, imagination breathes. We fill in the blanks not with guesses, but with empathy. We see ourselves. We too live stories in progress. We too leave things undone. And if one day the world were to stop, we too would be remembered in fragments, a message on a phone, a book left open, a song paused mid-chorus. Pompeii reminds us that incompleteness is not failure. It is life. And sometimes, the most powerful. Stories are the ones that never finished, because they invite us to finish them. Some cities live only in books, others in legends, but Pompeii lives in stone, not as ruins, not as relics, but as a presence, subtle, steady, and undeniably human. Its stones remember. They carry the warmth of hands that once built them, the echoes of footsteps long since silenced, and the imprint of lives frozen mid-motion. In our modern world, Pompeii's legacy is not measured by what was lost, but by what it continues to awaken. The legacy of presence, to walk through Pompeii, is to feel a strange duality. It is both deeply ancient and eerily familiar. You see street corners that resemble your own, graffiti that mimics social media scribbles, signs that shout shop names, homes that are humble, warm, and clearly lived in. Pompeii doesn't teach history from a pedestal. It invites you to kneel beside it, to touch the floor of a kitchen, to peer into a courtyard, to read a name carved hurriedly on a wall. It brings the ancient world close enough to touch. That closeness has made Pompeii one of the most studied archaeological sites in the world. More than a window into Rome, it is a mirror reflecting timeless truths about how we live, what we cherish, and how we remember. A classroom. Beneath the sky today, Pompeii is a classroom without a ceiling. Scholars from across the globe gather to study its streets and walls. Each layer of paint, each layer of ash, tells a story. Classicists, historians, architects, chemists, and conservators collaborate on unlocking its secrets. It is a city that never stops teaching. Students learn about Roman law from inscriptions, about economics from shop layouts, about gender roles from household items. Children studying Latin read graffiti that is lively and immediate. "I'm in love," or "Don't trust the moneylender." More than any scroll or statue, Pompeii shows the rhythm of real life. Universities offer field schools here. Technology companies use it as a proving ground for digital reconstructions. Artists draw inspiration for modern interpretations. Even chefs have recreated ancient recipes from traces found in kitchens and Thermopylae. A cultural crossroads, Pompeii's reach extends beyond academia. It has inspired art, fashion, film, and architecture. Designers model garments on frescoed figures. Directors stage entire scenes in its crumbling streets. Writers pen novels set amid its dust and sunlight. Musicians compose scores echoing its lost voices. In museums around the world, from Paris to New York, Pompeian mosaics and artifacts are exhibited not as curiosities, but as fragments of a shared inheritance. Because Pompeii is not just Roman. It is human. Its faces, its fears, its joys. They belong to all of us. A warning from the past, but Pompeii's legacy is not only artistic, it is also cautionary. Its destruction reminds us how swiftly life can change. That nature, while beautiful, is not ours to command. The very mountain that gave the city its fertility took it away in fire. For modern cities built near volcanoes, along coasts, across fault lines, Pompeii is more than memory. It is warning. Disaster preparedness programs study its timeline. Emergency response teams use its scenario to train for sudden evacuation. Urban planners cite it when considering risk mitigation. The past, if listened to, can protect the future. Ethics and memory. There is also a moral weight to Pompeii. What does it mean to display the dead? To cast a mother frozen in ash and show her to the world? Is it preservation or intrusion? Curators, archaeologists, and ethicists grapple with these questions. Over time, the focus has shifted from spectacle to respect. Plaster casts are shown, with context, with reverence, with the full humanity of those they depict. We now understand that these were not anonymous bodies. They were people. They had routines, flaws, and hopes. And their remains are not trophies. They are testaments. Their stillness demands we treat them not as exhibits, but as ancestors. Tourism and transformation. Over 2 million people visit Pompeii each year. They come for many reasons: curiosity, reverence, awe. Some leave changed, others leave inspired. Many return. Pompeii does not tell you what to think. It simply shows you what was. And in doing so, it invites reflection about what matters, about what lasts, about what we might leave behind. Children gaze at cast figures and ask, was she scared? Adults stare at kitchens and whisper, it looks like home. Couples stand in doorways and wonder who stood there last. Even the stones seem to listen. Pompeii in the digital age. The digital age has given Pompeii new life. Virtual tours allow people to explore its streets from thousands of miles away. Augmented reality apps overlay color on faded walls, showing how homes once looked. 3D printing helps recreate artifacts for study and exhibition. Machine learning analyzes inscriptions. Satellites monitor structural changes. Even AI models now help detect patterns in building layouts and urban design. The past has entered the future, but technology alone does not keep Pompeii alive. What sustains it is human wonder, the urge to understand, to connect, to remember. Legacy as invitation. Ultimately, Pompeii's legacy is not a relic. It is an invitation to walk more slowly, to listen more deeply, to notice what surrounds us, to value the present, as though it were already memory. It says, "Life is fragile, yes, but it is also beautiful." It teaches not with authority, but with presence. The city could have vanished. Instead, it endured, not by strength, but by stillness, by becoming so completely itself that even death could not erase it. And in that endurance, we find something of our own, a reminder that we too are writing our stories, step by step, breath by breath, on the stones of time. Night falls gently over Pompeii now, no longer the blackened sky of ash and fire, but a softer kind of dusk, washed in lavender light, brushed by cypress shadows, cooled by the breeze from the Bay of Naples. Where once the mountain roared, there is only silence, a silence not of desolation, but of rest. Pompeii sleeps, not as it did on that fateful night in 79 AD, when tremors shook mosaics from the walls and fire stole breath from the living, not in fear or finality, but in a sleep more ancient, more sacred, one born not of death, but of memory made whole. The city, now uncovered stone by stone, lies cradled in the hands of time. Its streets no longer echo with Roman sandals, but with the hushed footsteps of those who come in reverence. Visitors speak softly here, not from command, but instinct. For Pompeii does not demand silence. It inspires it, because to walk these streets is to walk beside ghosts, not in fear, but in fellowship. The breath between centuries' time moves differently here. The modern world, loud, bright, hurried, waits outside the gates. Within, time folds. Layers of centuries stack like sediment. A fig tree leans into the same courtyard where it once grew. A beam of light enters through a broken roof as it did on that August afternoon long ago. Here, one can hear the breath between centuries. A pot still rests beside a hearth. A fountain still waits to be filled. A bed frame leans in the corner of a room that once heard whispered dreams. Nothing moves, yet everything lingers. It is not frozen. It is paused, and in that pause lies Pompeii's power. A city with no farewell. Many cities are remembered through endings. Troy fell to fire and song. Atlantis sank into myth. Carthage was salted and erased. But Pompeii did not end. It simply stopped mid-sentence. A book left open, a room left unlocked. There were no last speeches, no monuments built in warning. The people did not know their stories were about to become part of ours, and perhaps that is why their stories touch us so deeply. They were not trying to be remembered. They were simply living, and in living, they became eternal. The light that remains in Pompeii. Beauty has outlived ruin. The frescoes still sing with colour, reds that blush, blues that cool, yellows that warm. Even the simplest of rooms hold light, reflected from polished plaster, glinting off broken glass, glowing from tiny oil lamps turned to stone. And outside, in the gardens, flowers bloom again. Some have been replanted based on pollen traces, roses, lavender, bay. Their scent moves through the streets once more, as if seeking the noses of those who once tended them. A garden is a soft thing, a fleeting thing, and yet, here, it survives. Beyond the dust, the casts of Pompeii's people have drawn attention for generations. They are still, fragile, sometimes painful to look at, but they are not only reminders of death, they are reminders of life. A woman shielding her child was once a neighbour, a sister, a singer of lullabies. A man lying face down with a tool belt was once a craftsman, a friend, a drinker of wine in the shade. These were people in the midst of becoming, not prepared to be remembered. And yet, they are. Because Pompeii did not die in grand myth. It lived in quiet humanity, and it is that humanity we carry forward, not their deaths, but their presence. The city in us, Pompeii, has become part of us. It lives in our stories, our architecture, our dreams. our caution, our wonder. It reminds us that beauty and vulnerability often walk together, that what we build, what we love, what we leave behind, all echo longer than we know. And so, every fresco seen, every poem written, every child who learns the word Pompeii for the first time is a continuation of that city, a way of saying, you are not forgotten, we see you still, and if the city dreams, perhaps it dreams of music in the forum, of sandals on stone, of the rustle of tunics and the warm scent of bread, of Bacchus feasts and twilight conversations in vine-draped gardens, of lovers writing on walls, of laughter echoing from baths, of hands raised in dance. Perhaps it dreams of a morning that never came, but we are here now, and in remembering, we give Pompeii what it never had, a soft ending, not in ash, but in words, in breath, in silence, the eternal sleep. There will never be a final word on Pompeii, because it does not rest in the past. It rests beyond time, between loss and love, between ruin and reverence. A city held in the heart of the world. The mountain still watches, the bay still glitters, the city still breathes. Not as it once did, but perhaps more deeply now, through all of us who pause, listen, and let it speak. So let us leave Pompeii as we found it, quiet, beautiful, dreaming, and may its sleep be eternal.